crossing it over for a mid-series-ish check-in. Locked on Bucks, Locked on Pacers. It's 3-1. It's kind of halfway over. It might not be halfway over. Let's take stock of the series, talk about the injuries. Can the Bucks come back? Will the Pacers clinch it tonight? We'll get to it all today on Locked on Bucks and Locked on Pacers.
You are Locked on Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday, y'all. Welcome into a crossover edition here on the Locked on Podcast Network, Locked on Bucks and Locked on Pacers, your team every day here on the Locked on Podcast Network. If you're hearing my voice first and you're on the Locked on Bucks feed, I'm Tony East. I host Locked on Pacers. This is a crossover, which means Locked on Bucks is here too. Justin Garcia is here. Justin, how you doing, man?
I'm doing as good as you can be, given where we currently sit at, but there's still some optimism.
What stage of the 5 stages are you in with the injuries and how the series has taken shape?
I don't know if there's actually 5 stages for Bucks fans. There's it gets dark pretty quickly. I think so. We were talking about this before. I think we all knew this was a possibility given how the Bucks looked, not the injuries, but given how the Bucks looked throughout the regular season, that look, you could have talked me into anything before the series started. The Bucks figure it out and they look like the team we envisioned, and they win this series in 5 or something brief. It goes 7 and the Bucks win or lose, or we see what we saw in the regular season. The frustrating part is we've seen more of what we saw in the regular season than anything else, but it hasn't been overwhelming. The injuries are a big part of it, and I do think the danger of that is it's easier to kind of accept your fate and say, well, what do you expect without Giannis and Dame? But there are some things that the Bucks do need to be mindful of, and you know, the last 2 years we've seen this team basically say, hey, injuries were the reason why our season came up short. And it's true. And it's fair to point out, you played the last 10 games of the playoffs in 2022 without Chris Middleton. You basically played the first 3 games of what was a 5-game series against the Miami Heat without Giannis. And now you've played the entire series without Giannis and likely the rest of the series without Damian Lillard. So in that sense, the Bucks have been snake bit, but I do think it goes a little deeper than that. And I hope that this series kind of gives the Bucks that message too of, look, it was stacked against us with these injuries, but we do need to do some things to continue shaping this roster.
I think if I was a Bucks fan, because of the injuries, I'd be permanently locked in the bargaining stage. I would never let anybody let me out. That's okay. We were just hurt. We'll be back next year to be hurt again for the 3rd year in a row. Thanks, everybody, for making either Locked on Bucks or Locked on Pacers your first listen today and every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube, where you can see our smiling faces as a part of the Locked on Podcast Network. As we continue going, this show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockdown to get started. Justin, if you knew before the series started that Giannis would not play in any of the first 4 games, and Dame would miss a full game plus get injured for an overtime period, and Chris Middleton would have an ankle injury, and Bobby Portis would get ejected from a game, would you have thought it was over? Would you have thought it'd be 2-2? Like, it's not fair to think that way, but that is what's happened. Yeah. Like, would you have taken 3-1? How do you feel about all of that stacked against the Bucks?
All of that stacked against the Bucks. I would assume best case scenario is the Bucks extend this to 5. You know, that it may be a sweep. My approach going in, and this is no inside information or anything, but you just, based on everything that you would hear from others, reading the tea leaves, and the fact that by all accounts, this is a 2 to 4 week injury. My assumption was Giannis is probably not going to play in this series. If he does, it would be like game 6 or 7 that he would come back. So that was part of the cope too, is understanding there's a very good chance. And that was, you know, one of the other things that I think Bucks fans got a little carried away with, in that we hang our hats on this. Giannis is such a fast healer, and look at what he did in 2021. Look at other injuries that he's come back from. And that is true. But at some point that ends, and you can't just keep pinning your hopes on that. As we've learned through the years, hope is not a strategy. So you had to come up with a strategy to beat the Pacers without Giannis. But it did just start to get comical in this series when you think about Dame all of a sudden going down, Chris Middleton getting his leg stepped on. Doc did say and was very optimistic and said, look, he's going to be fine for game number 5. But, that is another one you have to mention because as everybody knows with ankle injuries, you're probably fine the day of. It hurts immediately. You can walk it off, but it's the day after and the day after that where it really starts to swell up.
He might be averaging 50 a game if you weren't hurt. My God, has he been good?
Well, and, Bobby Portis ejected. Pat Beverly, too, playing dinged up yesterday. And that's the only ball handler the Bucks have. So, this is really a suboptimal spot for the Bucks to be in. But the big thing for me, and I think for a lot of Bucks fans, was the sour taste that you had a year ago with that exit to the Miami Heat. There was a lot of moving parts, and there was a lot of stuff going on off the court. There was the Giannis injury, which I think at the time a lot of Bucks fans pointed to and said, well, we think this series goes differently if Giannis is healthy and doesn't deal with a BS charge from Kevin Love and misses basically the first 3 games of that series. But then you start to hear more and more of the, it doesn't matter, this Heat team was going to blow through the Bucks anyway. May well have done that. But it is funny that now, a year removed, you're starting to hear more and more of, who knows how that series goes if Giannis is healthy. But, I think most Bucks fans just wanted to see what you saw Sunday night in knowing, especially with the injury front, the deck is stacked against you. It has been a very, very strange season that in many ways, I think a lot of Bucks fans are just ready for the season to be done and start over a new year, not blow up the team. But you wanted to see this team go out fighting. That's what they did in 2022 when they lost Chris Middleton, and they should not have taken the Boston Celtics to 7 games. That series, as we talked about the guys that were on the floor in game 4, wasn't much better in that series against the Celtics when you're leaning on Wesley Matthews to give you some offense on the perimeter. And they took that thing to 7. You did have Giannis, and that was a big reason why, but they fought until the end. You didn't really see that last year. So the hope was, look, if we're going to go out, let's at least go out fighting. And maybe that's what happens here, depending on game 5 and 6, potentially 7, but you at least saw it in game 4.
Yeah, I hate to lead with injuries because people in my feed are probably like, oh, come on, like our team's playing good. And I agree, but it's just such a massive storyline, obviously, right? And like I picked the Pacers to win the series, but my operating assumption was like Dame would be playing the whole time. And like Chris Middleton would not miss, even if just a few minutes of the series. Him missing any time is significant, right? All that has been baked into this and changed. Shams reporting right now, Justin, there is doubt Bucks All-Stars Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard will be able to play in a potential elimination game 5 versus the Pacers. So fitting timing as we talk about the injuries. Oh my goodness. I mean, that just sucks because obviously from the Pacers end, they probably feel pretty good about how they've played in general. I mean, they can only play who's across from them, and they looked like a team that had never played in the playoffs before in game 1. And then they looked really good in game 2, and Siakam was amazing. And then they switched things up to slow Siakam down, and all of a sudden Myles Turner looks amazing, and Haliburton's figured out like what the playoffs are all about and had a triple-double game winner and all this stuff. Like, that's all. Even if the Bucks have injuries that have made all that possible, the fact that they've had those moments and have kind of been able to ease into the playoffs is like good for them and their long-term future. And they've played well, and players who have not historically played well in the playoffs have been good. Like, there's a lot of really positive stuff for the Pacers to take from this. It just sucks that injuries are such a dominating storyline of this because I think, you've seen all the games. Like, the Pacers have to feel pretty good about a lot of the stuff they've done. There's a reason they're up 3-1. They've played good basketball.
What was your sense on game 1? Because I think with Bucks fans, especially, that's the one thing we can't wrap our heads around in that, everything we said needed to happen for the Bucks appeared to happen in game 1, where it was like the Pacers were playing at half speed and tentative. And I remember many times during that game looking next to our broadcast partner saying, what is going on here? Like, why are the Pacers not running and getting up and down the floor?
Yeah, this will sound lazy of me, and it is a little bit. They scored 94. Like, that's 5 fewer points than they scored in any regular season game. Like, that's so bad for who they were all year, as the Bucks saw them score like 120 plus every time they played the Bucks. Like, something else was going on. Like, they played bad, but like why was to me like you saw it in the first half too. They had 3 wide open left wing threes that hit nothing, right? Like they were just jittery and all over the place, and their rotation didn't make sense. And all these first-time playoff guys, Andrew Nembhard, Ben Shepherd, Tyrese Haliburton, who've all been way better since, look quite frankly bad. Like game 1 to me, and credit to the Bucks for taking advantage of this. They were up 30 in the second quarter, for Pete's sake. It was just so much inexperience, right? It was so much, and then they played better in the second half, and they settled in. They got it to like 12 or whatever, and then Dame got them. Dame didn't score, but like his presence, and they got it all together. But no, that's all it kind of was to me. I mean, I thought they'd play a lot better than that, but I thought game 1 would be one of their hardest games of the series because you can say you're ready for the playoffs and you feel normal, but you wake up on the day and it's not. It's different, right? It just is. And they talked about it after the game, and Lloyd Pierce said on their local broadcast that he could see the jitters. Like it was just that's part of it. And as players have talked about on both teams, that game really was from the Bucks pace, like right away. And the Pacers have done a better job since then of getting the game to be their speed. Just in general, there's not as many breaks. Like you can't jog anywhere. So even if the possessions are roughly the same, like it's just a faster paced ball popping kind of game. And that's really been their game. That's been harder on the Bucks. And when you're an older team, I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but it's hard for the Bucks to play that way for 48 minutes anymore. So that's really helped the Pacers too, is they figured that out at halftime of game 1. That's how I think they were better, even though they were jittery in the second half. So they've come out of that looking a lot better. But that's kind of my operating theory on both why they lost that game, but also why they looked so bad even compared to their regular season level.
Did you say for the Bucks to play that way for 48 minutes? Because it's very hard for the Bucks to play that way. Yeah, for 28 minutes. You and I talked about this after game 2 as well, in that Bucks started pretty well in game 2, at least offensively.
Yeah.
But I think anybody that had paid attention throughout the regular season and to these two teams and how they want to dictate things, you looked up at the scoreboard at one point in that first quarter and saw there was about 4 or 5 minutes left. And I think it was 29-25. Bucks were up. You immediately had the feeling of, it's too much. This is exactly what the Pacers are looking for. And sure, you get off to a fast start. I don't know if this can last. And it slowly did not last for the Bucks. They did a good job in game 1. Part of that was, again, I think as we just went through, the Pacers kind of dipping their toe in the water and getting used to the playoffs. But the Bucks did a good job of dictating the pace. They did a good job of that too at times in really both games in Indy, I thought. But the biggest difference, especially in game 4, was the Pacers found those spots to pick up the pace. The Bucks did a good job of picking themselves up and slowing things back down. But really from the second quarter on, because I think it was the third quarter where the Pacers went 7 of 14 on threes. That was their answer, was just finding those open threes. And again, without Giannis to help as the ultimate help protector, help defender, and with no Bobby Portis, I mean, that changed things immensely. As much as Bobby's been up and down throughout the season and in this series, the big piece of it was, the Bucks were already in a precarious spot with no Giannis in that they only have 3 bigs. So you take Giannis out of the mix, you start 2 of them. The only 2 that you have are in your starting lineup. So you have to figure out how to stagger those 2. And then 7 minutes into the game, you lose one of those guys. So it was just Brook Lopez, and you had to dust off Danilo Gallinari and put him out there. But that gave you a lot of minutes with no rim protector. So you had to pack the paint, and then you saw a ton of corner threes.
I want to talk a little bit about the guard play and a little bit of surprise I've had with the Bucks perimeter play. But Justin, before we talk about that, let's talk about DoorDash. Do you want to make your mom smile? Because Mother's Day is coming right up. Start Mother's Day with flowers or surprise your mom with gifts from the brands she loves delivered the very same day with DoorDash. Does your mom have a sweet tooth? Is she a tech enthusiast, a beauty connoisseur? That's my mom. Or is she outdoorsy? No matter what she's into, you can make her smile with a fruit or flower bouquet, makeup, tech gear, workout wear, and more. And DoorDash can help you make it all happen with same-day delivery, a good latte, a gift card, thoughtful gifts your mom deserves, the convenience you need. Thanks to DoorDash, shop with savings that would make her proud. With a Dash Pass membership, you'll save with a $0 delivery fee and reduced service fees on eligible orders from Dash Pass merchants that meet the minimum subtotal. Other fees apply. Terms apply, but you can get your Mother's Day gifts all in one place. Get 50% off your next order up to $15 when you spend $15+ on your next flower, convenience, grocery, or retail order now with the code LOCKEDONNBA on DoorDash. That's LOCKEDONNBA is the code. Order using DoorDash today. Terms apply. Back here crossing it over with Locked On Bucks and Locked On Pacers. Justin Garcia of Locked On Bucks and Tony East of Locked On Pacers here. Thanks for making us your first listen every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Check out our 24/7 Locked On Sports Today stream to get the latest and greatest from around the sports world with local experts covering every single team in every major league, plus several colleges, including my Hoosiers. That's the best way you can see that stuff 24/7. No more shouting of ESPN and Fox in your ear. That's the best way to get your sports news all the time. Justin, something that's been interesting to me in the series is like Brook Lopez has been super good every game. Chris Middleton has been awesome. Siakam and Turner have been really good. The front court battle and the intricacies of all that have been interesting. One separator to me, though, is Haliburton's figured it out, and Nembhard's been really good. And the Bucks, especially once Dame went down, have not gotten good enough guard play or ball handling play from anyone else to kind of match that. And I know what Beverly and Jay Crowder and Malik Beasley, like, you know what those guys are now. Andre Jackson's been good, but I thought they'd get enough from that crew to keep up. And I've been surprised by how big the gap has been there.
Yeah, and I think really all season long, Chris Middleton has basically been the Bucks' de facto backup point guard. You had the moments of campaign. I think you knew there was going to be some challenges there when you get into the postseason, given his size. But you bring in Pat Beverly; he's been very good for the Bucks. But it's also a 35-year-old point guard that we're talking about. So your expectations have to be reset there a little bit. And the Bucks have just been in this spot where you've needed to lean on Pat Beverly quite a bit, more than you really should at this stage in his career, with him being banged up as well and suffering that rib injury and an ankle issue before the playoffs too. That is really thrown another wrench into things. It was going to always come down to guys like Malik Beasley and like Pat Connaughton. And Malik Beasley had to say what he had to say on the Chris Haynes podcast back in January. He was asked about it by local reporters.
I have tried my best to not bring that up a single time this series.
Well,
I would like it on the record. The first time that made it to Locked On Pacers was not from me.
Well, yeah, that's on me. He was asked about it by reporters before the series started and said, look, I said what I said. I stand by it. And look, it's fine to say it. Malik Beasley hasn't backed it up in this series. He was pulled from the starting lineup about a week before the playoffs began. And, he knocked down some shots in game 4, but Malik Beasley has not had a good series. And that's where the Bucks are at, especially with no Giannis. You knew you were going to need one of those guys to get hot, to help you steal one of these games, whether it was Beasley, whether it was Pat Connaughton, who was one of the only reliable guys in that series against Miami last year and had some very big moments for this Bucks team in 2022 and 2021 en route to that championship. Pat Connaughton has not been very good in this series. Even guys like the rookie AJ Green, who the Bucks are very high on, and Doc Rivers has an immense amount of trust for a young player. He's come in and he hasn't given you those moments either. So it has been an even wider gap when you're evaluating the backcourts for these teams than I think a lot of Bucks fans imagined that it would be, especially, given that we spent a lot of time going into this series talking about the changes with the Pacers. For as much as the Bucks are a different team, I'm sure Indiana would point to the same and say, you didn't face us when we had Pascal Siakam. Bucks fans pointed to the changes for the negative with Buddy Hield traded, and hey, they don't have quite as much shooting. Bennedict Mathurin's out for the season. They haven't played at a faster pace, or as fast, I should say. It's still light years faster than the Bucks since they brought in Pascal Siakam. And the, what version of Tyrese Haliburton are you going to see after that hamstring injury? So I think there was that sense of, okay, we think we can handle this, but you still knew you were going to need one of those X factors be impactful in this series. And the Bucks just have not gotten that, which it was going to be a challenge to get by, even if you had Damian Lillard on the floor and Chris Middleton was healthy. But with him out of the mix and way they hobbled Chris Middleton, you're in even more trouble if that's what you're going to get from your backcourt.
You're telling me you didn't see AJ Green score in isolation on Ben Shepherd in game 2 and it changed your perception of the backcourt matchup in this series? That play happened. That was a real thing.
You know what I will say is this too. Up until some stretches of game 4, TJ McConnell, for whatever reason, feasts on the Bucks more than any other team. And it's not
No, he doesn't. Every team thinks that, but that's not true.
Well, that's actually true. And looking up his numbers on Basketball Reference, when you see this is all he averages against the Bucks, but he's had some big moments against the Bucks.
Yeah.
And that's before, you know, the backcourt that we look at and say, well, Malik Beasley and Damian Lillard, who isn't going to torch that defensively. But AJ Green had some very good moments where I think Bucks fans saw it and said, man, AJ Green, we finally found a guy that can slow down TJ McConnell.
So my backcourt thinking entering the series is similar to what you kind of just laid out, right? Part of what made the Pacers play so well against the Bucks all season was the lack of perimeter defense on Milwaukee, especially before Patrick Beverley. Like, it was Beasley, Payne, Lillard, Connaughton, and the Pacers had so many guards who could get in the paint, and that was pre-Haliburton injury. So Haliburton and Mathurin and McConnell were getting in the lane all the time. So they were just getting whatever shot they wanted, and then Hield was on the team still for spacing purposes. And Bruce Brown was on the Pacers for those games too, right? And so there's no Bruce Brown. Mathurin's hurt. Buddy Hield's traded away, even though he's not attacking the paint, but like he's a fine player. Although the Sixers don't seem to think so. So my thought was like, Ben Shepherd's been good, and they found other ways to get in the paint. Siakam's a good player, but Beverley will help one because they have a like deterrent, and they have less like negative guys because Campaign's gone, and there's less paint pressure appliers on the Pacers. But that hasn't really, I mean, it has changed stuff a little bit, but not nearly as much as I thought. And Siakam has taken over the onus of the rest of the paint pressure in the first 2 games, so much so that the Bucks now have to send 2 to him every time he catches it 15 feet in. And then there's an opening somewhere anyway, because there's 2 guys guarding 1 player. So that really is probably my biggest pre-series L, is thinking that shift from the regular season means I can't really look back at those as much as I thought. I could have leaned on that a little bit, and that has, especially in the recent games, like early, the Pacers talked about not getting enough paint pressure in game 1. You've seen them really make sure to focus on that after screens, even in isolation, just making sure they can get the Bucks in rotation, because even when you're locked in as the Bucks, who have a good defensive peak without Giannis and being a little older and slower, like there's only so much you can do. So I think that was something I got wrong, and that is a surprisingly strong favoring of the Pacers, because even though Siakam and Turner, and one of them's gotten basically 30 points every game, Brook Lopez has been awesome, like really good this series. Middleton, when he's sliding up to the 4 or playing the 3, he's been so good. I'd give Portis a good grade for the series. I don't know if Bucks fans would. I would. So that has been like an okay matchup in the front court, but the backcourt separation is just not something I expected at all.
I mean, it's tough to give Bobby a good grade for the series if for no other reason than game 4, you know, knowing what you're up against.
That's killer.
And look, I'm sure, and every team knows this, that Bobby's an emotional player that can be triggered, and you know how to get under his skin. We've seen moments too of Bobby and others getting into it where, you know, okay, let's try to incite something here. I'm not saying that's what the Pacers did, but you know that. And if you're Bobby
in a game that already had chippiness and to be clear, stupid text, but already had 2 texts.
2 stupid texts, sure, but you can understand why they did it. That you knew it was going to be extra chippy going in. But to that point that you already saw 2 technical fouls called, you cannot put your team in that spot if you're Bobby Portis. So for that reason, and you know, Doc Rivers did say after game 3, which, you know, I talked about this on the radio show the other night. Game 3 to me, even before we learned the Damian Lillard news, game 3 was the tough one to me. That felt like, you know, if the Bucks lose this series, that's the death knell, because that was right there for the taking. You got a Chris Middleton masterclass in this game, a new playoff career high. You had so many chances. You had the ridiculous shots. For whatever reason, Rick Carlisle doesn't think to foul in those spots late.
He told them to. They just didn't do it.
Well, the Bucks have experience with that as well earlier in the season.
He said he told them to. You never really know what all goes on there. But anyway.
We had the same thing with Adrian Griffin in the regular season where we couldn't figure out how to foul. I think it was Nico not Niko Mirotic, how to foul Nikola Vucevic. But regardless, that to me was the one that even before we learned, hey, this Dame Achilles injury is actually pretty serious, because that was just an oh, by the way. You wondered, man, Dame didn't attempt any shots in overtime and didn't score late. And then Doc said, yeah, it was his Achilles, and it started to slowly trickle out. Before you knew that, to me, that was the tough one, because it was, man, you could steal that. It was right there for the taking. And now, especially knowing that, it's a lot to ask that group without Dame, without Giannis, to win 3 with no margin for error. When, if you win that, even if you lose game 4, which I would assume if the Bucks win game 3, we see a much different start to the game for the Pacers on Sunday night. So let's say you lose game 4. It's still 2-2. It's a best of 3 series where 2 of those 3 would be played in Milwaukee. And who knows what can happen in 2 games. You could get one shooting variance game. You could get possibly, as we talked about, the Pacers kind of getting acclimated to the playoffs. Maybe you get a tense team in game 7 that hadn't been in those spots. But having to win 3 with no margin for error, I think ultimately game 3 being right there for the taking and not being able to close that one out, that may ultimately be what doomed the Bucks in this series.
Yeah, you could pick a number for game 3, but Pacers were up 19 like that. And then the Bucks were the better team for 35 straight minutes of that game. Like, that was one they probably feel like, man, we just started a little better.
Yeah, and I think that's the frustrating part too for Bucks fans, knowing all the guys that are out and how much you're going to be up against without Giannis and without Dame. But I think you can realistically say, look, I know we had a terrible start in the first quarter of game 3, but by and large, for those basically 9 quarters that we played in Indy, we were the better team. We think in those quarters, we think we played better. We just didn't finish strong. We put ourselves in way too big of a hole in the first quarter. Pacers made better plays down the stretch, especially in overtime, and the Pacers hit a whole lot of threes in game 4.
Right. I agree. And yet reality is it's 3-1 Pacers. Can the Bucks pull this off? Can they get some wins like in game 1, or is it over tonight? Let's close out talking about that before we answer that question, though. Let me tell you guys about FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA. A series is already over somehow. The NHL as well. Baseball is in full swing. A lot of Brewers fans listening, I'm sure. Go Phillies for my end. And FanDuel is your place to bet on every game right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets. That's a lot. Guaranteed just by signing up. That's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe and secure and super easy to use. I don't know what you're waiting for. Visit FanDuel.com/lockdown to get that offer and make your first bet an automatic win. That's with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on Locked On Bucks and Locked On Pacers. Hope everybody's having a great Tuesday. Game's really late, so lots of time to listen to this on game day. I'm a hater of the 9:30 Eastern start time, Justin. Thankfully, I will be in Central Time for the game. What a 4:30 Central start time, and then 2 games later, a 9:30 Eastern. What a weird series of start times.
The 4:30 Central Time start was absolutely fantastic.
For our lives, it was great. For fans, it wasn't so great.
Well, yeah, I mean, for some fans too. I mean, it's Friday afternoon. You've especially if you're working from home, you've already started to shut down. The 8:30 tip Central Time, 9:30 Eastern Time. That's a rough one because if, as you mentioned, that report from Shams, if we don't see Giannis and Dame tomorrow, there's a pretty good chance the Pacers wrap this thing up. And traditionally, when we have our final game, I do our radio network post game, and then I'll do a local show post game. Whenever the final game is played, that has traditionally been about a 3-hour post-game show that I will do. So we're talking about like a 1 to 2 a.m. leaving the arena story.
So look, we got information during this, so you might not have had time to fully process game 5 about the injuries for the 2 stars, but do you think the Bucks can do this? It's happened before. If you're going to come back from 3-1, you almost have to be the home team. I think only twice ever a non-home team has done it. And the Bucks are the home team. They have experience. They have good players still. Can they do it? Or do you think they're done?
I'm not going to say they're done. I think there's a very slim chance they can do it. I do think they can still win a game in this series. I think given the report that we talked about, if you just look at the wording from Shams, that there's, serious doubt that I think take the Damian Lillard thing out of it. We talked about that a little bit before, that I think that's probably more long-term for the Bucks in the postseason, that all along your hopes were, can you get Giannis back at some point in this series? I think the wording of it being a tricky strain that could complicate returns and create some risk, that does not lead me to believe it's a, hey, if he misses game 5, we think we can have him for game 7. That's a, he misses game 5. Let's see if we can win this series, and maybe we could get him at some point in the second round. So, look, I think it's just, it comes down to how much fight does this team have, and what version of the Bucks do we see? I think the other thing is, who do you start, right? And I think the notion for a lot of Bucks fans, if they see that the cope is already in place of, look, our season probably ends tonight, I want to see the team go out fighting. I want to see a Chris Middleton masterpiece again, but I want to see the young guys. And there's one name that intrigues me the most. I know the Bucks don't have a lot of blue chip young players, but we've talked about Andre Jackson Jr. We've talked about AJ Green. I think those guys are both going to be big pieces for the Bucks next season. Chris Livingston is another one who has shown some flashes for the Bucks throughout this season.
Good at the end of game 2.
Good at the end of game 2. He has been a monster in the G League this season. He is the exact type of player and body the Bucks do not have. He is a big wing. He is physical. He is a defender. He doesn't score. And that's the problem, again, with Andre Jackson. As we saw, as much good as he brings, it's not just the Pacers. Any team is going to say, the corners, maybe you can hit those shots. Everywhere else, we are going to leave you open because we don't think you can score. Chris Livingston has a lot of that too, but there's a lot to like. So I think if this is what you have, you obviously turn to Chris Middleton and Bobby Portis and Brook Lopez, and that's scoring right there. But you need some impact from the young guys. And again, it's one of those names. Even if you have Chris and Bobby and Brook, and even if they play, in the case of Chris and Brook, like they did in Chris's case throughout this whole series, but in game 4, especially for Brook and Chris, you're still going to need one of those aforementioned names. If it's AJ Green, Malik Beasley, someone, Pat Connaughton, you feel like you need one of those guys to have a, hey, he hit 5 threes tonight type of game to give yourself a good chance.
Justin, I majored in math for a part of college, so I'm just going to do some math if you don't mind. If you think the Bucks have a 79% chance in every game, that's really high. It's almost 80%, right? Almost 4 and 5. Odds would still say they lose the series because winning 3 in a row is hard, right? It's really hard from a statistical perspective. If you're a Pacers fan, that's where your solace should be. Like, if you think the Bucks have a 60% chance of winning each game, the odds they win the series is like 21.5%. Winning 3 in a row is hard, especially when you're as banged up as the Bucks are. So just statistically, it almost feels like it's over, even though it's certainly not, right? But to me, what this will take for the Pacers to really like seal it, every game this has been wild to me. Their bench losing every game this series has been stunning. Like, their bench was so good in the regular season. I thought a big factor for the Pacers this series was their bench would be better than the Lillardless Bucks. And the Bucks
bench has not been good throughout the regular season.
The Pacers bench hasn't either, and that's stunned me. Those guys were solid all season. Like, and they come in and they all have like a toggling game. Like, Toppin has a good first half and a bad second half, and then McConnell has a bad first half and a good second half. Like, if they can put it together for a full game, I think that would be the difference, because the starters have done a great job for the Pacers in several consecutive games. But when the mixing and matching starts, the Bucks can find ways to find advantages, and no one can guard Chris Middleton. If their bench is good in game 5, it has not happened yet, and it's not a thing you say in the playoffs very often. It's like, oh, the bench is the difference, but it really is to me. Like, they have the better talent there. If those guys can actually put together full games, that might be it, because the Bucks' depth, we're talking about Chris Livingston, like, is lacking. So, with no offense to him, to be clear.
No, and look, you're not leaning on Chris Livingston's score either, and that's what has struck me the most is the Bucks basically matched the Pacers bench in game 4, and again with no Dame now, take him out of the mix, and you have to bump somebody else up into the starting lineup. It just makes it even more challenging. So the fact that they even held their own in that regard, I think, blew a lot of us away. That game 3 overtime one that we keep going back to, I think they got 4 or 6 points from the bench. in that game. And it was just from those two names that we mentioned, just from the young guys in AJ Green and Andre Jackson. So the Bucks bench has not been good all season long, but it's, it makes it an even bigger ask when you say, okay, now two guys that start are out. So that bench that we haven't really been able to rely on, well, you're going to rely on even less because we got to take two of you and move you into the starting lineup.
What a weird series this has been.
I think the big part for the Bucks, for both these teams, is the start to the game. If the Pacers come out and play fast, and it's another one of those quarters where you look up and we're midway through the quarter and the Pacers are already up to 22 points and you feel like, here we go. Or if it's a quarter where the Bucks come out and start hitting shots, that doesn't mean it's over, especially given the players that are out for them. But they need to get off to a good, fast start if you're the Bucks, because you can't constantly put yourself in a hole and start to dig out of that, especially without Damian Lillard and without Giannis. And if you go down big in an elimination game, a team that was eliminated on their home floor last year, I didn't think that would be the case. You do wonder if that sets in too, of here we go again. And especially now that we don't have Giannis and we don't have Damian Lillard, theoretically in this scenario, that could ultimately, the first quarter could determine who wins this game.
I agree. It has been very telling all series, although really it was the early second quarter of game one where the Bucks went from up 1 to up like 600, I think it was, in about 4 seconds. So, yeah, I agree. Starts the game's going to be massive. If the Pacers are taking the ball out of the net over and over, they're going to be in trouble. Their defense will matter quite a bit. So the Bucks, Justin, I can't believe we're already talking about this being potentially over before April is over, and yet injuries have made that the case. Where can people find you, your work covering, and very frequently, not even just for Locked On, talking, using your voice to discuss the Milwaukee Bucks?
Yes, you can find me on Locked On Bucks. You can find me on the Bucks Radio Network alongside Dave Kane on the radio calls and on our Bucks flagship station, WTMJ in Milwaukee.
Highly recommended. Justin and I met after game 2, and we talked for a very long time. Fiserv was turning off the lights. Said, get out of here, you two. Locked On Pacers every day. We'll see what we're talking about on Wednesday. It will certainly depend on what happens in the Fiserv forum that night. I'm on Twitter at Tony R. East if anyone actually uses that app at the state it's in anymore. Talking Pacers there as well. Thank you all for listening. Hope you enjoy the game tonight. Back covering it tomorrow on both of our shows. Till then, everybody, have a wonderful day.